I've measured the resin in, and don't do it sitting down on the bench. When I had the container of resin, I had the measure cup up by eye, so I could make sure I was at the right height. And you can see we're nicely up to the 60mm mark. If you pour too much, just tip your cup back a bit, hold it at that angle while you pour the hardener in, and that way you've got a pretty well the ratio. Don't worry about mucking around pouring bits back in the container. You end up with more trouble than it's worth. So I'm going to put the hardener in now, and then we'll go mixing. Now for the mixing. If you have a look, it's pretty well separated. You've got to mix really well. I use tongue depressors. They're brilliant. They're cheap, they don't splinter, so you don't end up with bits of wood in your epoxy. They are so versatile. They get used all the time around the workshop. Now I'm going to put the camera down so you can see how it mixes in. Even this, I've had this for a fair run in the microwave. It's still quite thick. It's a fairly thick product, and it takes a bit to mix in. Pull up through, pull it up. It'll take you a few minutes of mixing to get all this mixed in. We're starting to get an even colour coming through, and it's fairly warm. Now you scrape around the edges. It's important to go right around the edges and into the corners, because if you don't, guess where the unmixed resin will be sitting. See how you trap quite a few air bubbles? We got a secret trick for getting rid of air bubbles. Now if you're new at this, don't try and do it direct from the container. Always pour into a separate container and then give it a quick mix. So scrape out as much as you can out of the first container, and I'll show you how to do it. Into your second container, always scrape out as much as you can. Now the reason for doing this is in case you had any unmixed pour on gloss, you don't take it across the other container. Or if you do, it'll easily mix in once you do the quick mix in the other container. Done my quick mix, now we're going to pour. No mucking around with this. I tend to pour from quite a height, so if you look, and what that does, it breaks the big air bubbles, and we just go backwards and forwards and then let it do its own thing. It'll spread out across the job fairly evenly. How's that, eh? See how thick it is? Now, there's a few tricks to this. If you warm the timber before you do the pour, it'll go on thinner. The warmer the pour on gloss is, and the warmer the day, the thinner the pour on gloss will be. So everything's warmer, it's going to flow faster. The problem is with that, but what do you think? Because everything's hot, it's going to gel a lot faster, so you've got to be careful. Be very careful. Now notice I haven't gone towards the edges. I haven't gone anywhere near the edges with this. Staying well away from the edges, because it's got to flow out. It'll flow out and find its level. Okay, I'm not going to scrape out the container. Don't bother scraping out the container. You'll only create problems for yourself. Now that's it. Let's do its thing. I might help it a little bit here, because it's fairly thick. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to see how it's close to the edge here. I'm just going to pull it down this way a bit, then pull it out a bit, because what happens by pulling that out, it draws it towards that surface. So it's fairly thick. Don't use a brush to do this. And notice I'm not pulling it right to the edge. Pull it. Whoops, I got it a bit close there. That's not what I wanted. Anyway. So now this is a low spot here, so I'm not going to feed it down into there until I get the rest of this sorted. Don't go too hard or you'll induce air. I'm just going to keep an eye on this now, because what it'll do, it'll come towards the edge. Now to get rid of the air bubbles, we don't do silly things like using hair dryers and heat guns. Heat guns are good at burning it. Also remember, this is very level, so it's going to take a bit to bring it over. So when it starts going over the edge, like we got here, just tease it along. Don't let it just start to go over in one spot, because what'll happen, it'll just go over in that one spot if you let it. If you see it run away, you can even pull it back from those spots. Right. Oh shit, we've still got a bit of dust here. Let's get rid of that. Not that that'll worry it, it'll melt into it. And you won't know there's any dust. Your problem child's dust on the surface after you get it poured. Now, when you scrape it onto another edge, make sure it's a vertical edge. Don't put it onto a flat edge. The vertical edge, you'll find there's enough surface tension to pull the bubbles out. Whereas if you do that on a horizontal edge, you'll trap the bubbles in there. No, it gets messy. Especially if it started to gel when you do it. Yeah, it definitely won't be your friend, trust me. This will take about 24 to 48 hours before it's set enough to roll over and cut the dags off. Again, you can put the tape, you can put tape around the bottom. Because this is a fairly rough surface, I don't want to do that. You're better off just letting the dags run right around down on. Just let the dags go. Yeah, what I tend to do every half hour or so, I come along and drag them off until it's well gelled. How's that? We haven't even got rid of the air bubbles yet. It's a beautiful piece of timber. Picked it up out of scrap bins at a Sydney timber and working with wood show about 10 years ago. And it's such a handy piece to show people how to use the stuff. And you too can make magnificent pour-on surfaces like this.